Studio audience, and we are live. Welcome back to the bigger picture. We have returned. Oh, look at that. What a great welcome from you there, Rob. I should probably have you unmuted at the beginning to give that boisterous, raucous, loud cheer. There we go. We are ready to go with the bigger picture. A reminder of some ground rules in case you are watching for the first time. You are more than welcome to ask any question and interrupt us at any point for clarity on the topic that we are discussing. But we always save a proper Q&A for after the session for any wider, broader questions, clarifications, applications. The most important thing is that we're able to keep everybody on the journey of the material, make sure that what I'm saying makes some semblance of sense. So please do ask questions throughout, but we'll save any bigger questions, any tangents, anything that takes us a bit off topic. We'll save those until later on, if that's all right, guys. So with that in mind, hopefully everyone can see that. If I show that on the screen, you can see our slideshow. Hopefully I can see our slideshow. Hopefully the tech is all set up. It's a while since we've done this. So here we go with the bigger picture. Parshat Vayeira. Can you believe this, guys? We've seen Bereshit together. We've seen, I was about to say Lech Lecha, but no. We saw Noach together and we saw Lech Lecha together. And now we are going to enter into the exciting world of Parshat Vayeira. Just a little bit of a recap for ourselves. All right, taking us from the very beginning, we talked about Adam and Chava eating from the tree, which meant that they now had, or humankind now has, free will. We talked about the battle, the conflict between Tov and Ra, between good and evil. And we talked about how the flow of history through those first 10 generations, that Ra overcomes the Tov until we reach the generation of the flood in Parashat Noach, with a complete breakdown of boundaries. We talked about how the flood, the post-flood world, brings us to a world of maturity, having gone from adolescence into maturity after going through a mikveh. Some of these things may sound familiar, and we may remember some of the things that we've talked about. And then we had the post-flood existence with the three sons of Noach forming the base, the building blocks of the 70 nations of the world. We had Shem, Cham, and Yafet. We talked about their names. We talked about their essences. We talked about the types of nations that come out from them. And we said that there are 70 nations, and the 71st nation, 10 generations after Noach, we reach Avraham. We reach the origins of our Jewish people. We hit Lech Lecha after that, and we talked about the descent of Avraham after he gets told to follow Hashem and to head towards the land of Canaan. Almost immediately he has to go down to Egypt. We had him coming back out of Egypt, and Avraham and Lot have to split, and then there was the war of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. We had the covenant of the covenant between the parts with the different animals that you had to walk through, and that was symbolic of Jewish history. And we talked a lot about the 4 exiles, the 4 kingdoms, the 4 superpowers that the Jewish people will have to contend with throughout history. We ended up in the end of our last series talking about Yishmael. We talked about the Brit Milah. We talked about the some of the layers of complexity and depth around Yishmael and the descendants of Yishmael. And then finally, we hit Parshat Vayeira. So that's where we're up to, guys. Parshat Vayeira. Quick show of hands if you had a chance to read through the Parsha in English or in Hebrew or in Latin or in Russian or in Greek or in French. All right, a couple of hands there. So here we go. We've talked in the past about the need to break up the Parsha and to be able to identify the key themes. We've done that, this recap that you can see on the screen is the recap of the different segments of Parshat Lech Lecha. Okay, so as we turn to Parshat Vayeira, it's a long Parsha and there's a lot that's going on. And if you remember, we said that we divide up the themes by different paragraphs. Okay, we have Petuchot and Stumot. We have closed paragraphs where a paragraph starts mid-line in the Torah. and we have a Ptuchot, which is where they finish at the end of a line and then a new paragraph starts, right? So bearing in mind that we're trying to divide up our parsha into themes, into distinct sections, based on Ptuchot and Stumot, what would we say is the first theme of Parshat Vayeira? Audience participation is welcome. Right, we are looking for the first theme of Parshat Vayeira so that we can start to build our picture. What are we going to say? Hospitality, says Lawrence. Lawrence says hospitality. Why? Because that's where the story starts. All right, so interesting. Anybody else want to counter offer or suggest anything else? All right, just to help us understand why this is a difficult question. Yeah, go on. What were we going to say?
Sarah is told she's going to have a baby.
Sarah is told that she's going to have a baby. Good. Is that going to be our first theme, Martin? Or is that just one of the things that happens in the opening set? What were you going to say, Richard?
Visiting the sick.
Visiting the sick. Excellent. That's how the parasha starts. Kathy, you want to chime in? Oh, I've had a private message from my mum, no less, to say Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick.
Sorry. Basically, it's showing Hashem's love for the people and promising all sorts of things.
Promising all sorts of things with Hashem's love for the people, says Kathy.
For Sarah, and talking about how he cares for Avraham. I suppose
that's a long title, though, isn't it? That's a long title.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, just to highlight why this is complex, guys. All right. Don't worry, I've come prepared. Okay. Parshat Vayeira in this version of the Art Scroll Tanakh starts towards the bottom of the page over there. Okay, and it's Avraham sitting outside his tent after having just performed the Brit Milah on himself. Okay. Now let's take a look at how long this paragraph runs through. Okay, we've got the hospitality, we've got the visiting of the sick, okay, but this whole piece, okay, we're into Shani, we're into the second portion over there, right, the promise of a son, God's love for Avraham, we've got the story of Sodom, we've got Lot being saved, we're into Shlishi, chapter 19, right, all the way down to chapter 20 over there. I've got the whole episode with Lot and his daughter. That's all within one chapter, right? So if we're trying to break down our parasha, we immediately hit a bit of a problem because there's so much that happens in that first paragraph, and we're trying to encapsulate that into one or two words. Okay, we've got at the beginning of the parasha, we've got Avraham sitting outside his tent. He greets, I should say, three men who we actually know to be malachim, angels, emissaries of the Almighty. All right, and they have a mission. One of their missions is to heal Avraham. One of the missions is to announce the birth of Yitzchak to Sarah, and one of them is to destroy Sodom. That's everything that we see in this opening paragraph. So this first paragraph is massive, and there's loads going on, and that's before we get into the other sections of the parasha. So actually, if we had to break down that opening paragraph, we could perhaps call it the mission of these three malachim, of these three angels, these three messengers. All right, and one of them has the responsibility of healing Avraham, who's sitting there on the third day since his Brit Milah, in excruciating pain, and the Torah tells us that Hashem purposely turns up the thermostat, and it's boiling hot, and he's still sitting outside, wanting to be able to offer hospitality to anyone who passes by, but Hashem purposely makes it too hot so that no one will disturb him. And yet these three malachim come. He's in the middle of a conversation with Hashem. He stops the conversation with Hashem to go and do hachnasat orchim, to go and give hospitality to these strangers. Okay, so one of them's coming to heal Avraham. One of them is coming to announce the birth, and one of them is coming to destroy Sodom. All right, so there's loads going on just in that opening paragraph, and that's before we get into anything else. Right now, where do we see this idea of malachim, of angels? The Torah only tells us that he lifts up his eyes, v'hinei shlosha anashim, that these are people that he sees. So why am I talking so much about angels? So let's set the scene a little bit. Right, at the beginning of our parasha, Vayeira elav Hashem be'elonei mamrei v'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel k'chamayam. Hashem appeared to Avraham in the plains of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Hashem turns up the temperature to make it super duper hot, so there shouldn't be anyone around. He's in the middle of a conversation with Hashem. Vayisa einav vayar v'hinei shlosha anashim. There are these three men. Nitzavim alav, who are standing over him. Vayar vayaratz likrasam. He goes and he runs out to them to greet them. Mit pesach ha'ohel vayishtachu aretz. So he bows towards the ground. So he meets these strangers. He invites them in. We have the whole bringing of the food. We have the whole announcement of the birth of a son. We have the episode of Sodom, the destruction of Sodom. We have the negotiation where Avraham says, what if you find 50 righteous people, 40 righteous people, etc., etc. We have the destruction of Sodom. We have Lot escaping with his wife and his daughters. But of course, one of them dies. Which one dies?
Wife.
His wife dies, turns into a pillar of salt because she turns around to look at the destruction. And then the episode where he is alone with his daughters and they end up violating him. So there's loads going on in this opening paragraph, and that's where the paragraph comes to an end. So these three anashim, these three people, were actually taught are malachim, yeah. And it's fascinating. Just a little bit about our malachim. So we're going to see a source in a minute that talks about the names of some of these angels, some of these messengers, and so it pays for us to just flesh this out a little bit. There's a famous prayer, I guess it is. I forgot to look up where this is written, but it's a song that I learned a number of years ago. It says, B'Shem Hashem Eloikei Yisrael, Mimini Michael, Mismoli Gavriel, Milfanai Uriel, Me'acharai Raphael, V'yal Roshi Shechinat Kel. So we have malachim, we have these emissaries of Hashem, and we are taught some of their names. And it's very, very interesting to see these names and to understand these guardian angels, so to speak, that Hashem has put into the world. And just if we sidestep just for a second to see what we're talking about, a very interesting thing emerges. The source, and I need to look it up really. The source for the names of these angels, we're said that on our right side we are accompanied by an angel called Michael. All right, and on the left side we are accompanied by an angel called Gabriel, and in front of us we are accompanied by an angel called Uriel, and on the behind us we're accompanied by an angel called Raphael, and above us, Vial Roshi, upon my head, is the Shekhinah, is God's divine presence, as it were. And I remember hearing a wonderful explanation about these names. Okay, so Michael is on our right side. Our right side is our strongest side. That's what Jewish sources teach us. Our right side is our strongest side. So which angel do we need on our right side? We need Michael, because that name means mi kakel, me who is like God, right? When we are in our moments of strength, we have to be reminded that we are not like God, and that's the point. That's why we have Michael on our right-hand side. Our left-hand side is our weaker side, which is why we have Gavriel, Gebor, the strength of God, because the left side needs to be strengthened. And then it says, in front of us, Umilfanai, before me, is Uriel. Right? And if we break down the name of Uriel, we have Or. We have the light. So when things are dark in front of me, so then I have the light of Hashem to help illuminate my path. Umeachorai Raphael. Behind me I have Raphael. When I fall back, when I fall back and I'm in need of a refu'ah, I'm in need of a recovery, so I have this divine emissary, I have Raphael behind me to lift me back up again. V'yal Roshi Shechinat El. And on top of me I have the Shekhinah. So that's just a little bit of background to some of these names that we're going to be floating around. Okay, but fundamentally, we are taught that three of these angels approached Avraham, and they have a mission: one to heal Avraham, one to announce the birth of Yitzchak, and one of them is going to destroy Sodom. Why is this significant? Because we're taught that an angel can only achieve and can only accomplish one task at a time. So if an angel, whatever all of this means, right? If an angel is sent to perform a task in this world, it's only going to be given one task, one mission. Okay? We're going to see that in a source in just a moment. But what we really need to understand, we won't get fully there tonight, but we need to understand what is going on, that this is one paragraph. What underlying theme is there that validates putting all of this together under one heading? We could have broken this down into sections, but the Torah doesn't. The Torah has this as one whole topic, right? One whole heading, the opening paragraph, the mission. It's all inside this one very, very long paragraph. And not only that, but these malachim are sent as one group. They could have been sent individually, but they're not. They're sent as one group. Even though they're doing different things, they are nonetheless sent together. Okay? And also, if we are familiar at all with the story, then we have a big question on our hands, because we've just said that an angel can only perform one task, one job, one mission at a time. One of them is healing Avraham, one of them is announcing the birth, one of them is destroying Sodom. However, it's very interesting, because if we have a look at this next source, right, which is Rashi, talking about these three men, which is actually our angels. Okay, it's actually our emissaries. So it says, one of them is coming to announce to Sarah the birth, one of them is to overturn Sodom, one of them to heal Avraham, because a malach, a messenger, cannot perform two missions. Okay, the next thing we say in this Rashi is, Raphael sheripe et Avraham, halach misham lahatzil et Lot. That Raphael, who has come to heal Avraham, he is this, right? Remember what we said? Falling back. Me'acharai Raphael, when I need recovery, I have Raphael there who's going to heal. So Raphael is coming to heal Avraham, and from there he goes on to rescue Lot, which is interesting, because how is that? The printed page is a bit out of focus. I'm not sure what that means, Gary. Which printed page?
Your slide is out of focus.
Not sure.
Really? Can you try and make me a bit bigger?
No, I think it's just the way it's coming across on the screen.
That's very strange. Just this particular slide, or?
No, the other one was as well.
The other one was, oh goodness me, I don't know what we're going to do about this. Am I full screen for you guys?
You are for me.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
There was one which I don't know whether you made an adjustment. It came up initially blurred, and then it cleared.
I'm just wondering if that's Wi-Fi or not. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. You'll just have to trust me, because I don't know how I'm going to make it clear. Hopefully, it will just get clear. It looks fine.
It is readable. It's just
Okay, I'm so sorry.
It's not nice to look at. It's blurred.
I'm so sorry. That's very frustrating. Let me just check that it's not because of this. I'm not sure why. I'm so sorry, everyone. Okay. So So if we are saying that Raphael is actually performing two tasks, we're going to have a challenge on our hand of understanding how that is one job, one shlichut, one task. So there's a lot going on in this opening paragraph to explore. We're not exploring everything tonight, but that's just some of the complexity that arises from the fact that this is one long paragraph. One long paragraph where we have all of this happening in one section, right? Where we are having a mission of 3 malachim, 3 angels who are coming to do 3 tasks. That's just part 1. Okay, that's before we even start on the next topic. What would we say is the next topic in Parashat Vayeira?
Covenant.
Covenant. So Lot was in that first section, right? Sodom is destroyed. Lot is saved. We have a problem because there's an angel who's saving him, but that would seem to be that he's doing 2 jobs. So after Lot, the next part that happens, beginning of chapter 20.
It's the covenant between Avraham and Abimelech.
So Avraham goes and settles in Guerra, and Sarah is abducted, and then Avraham goes and gets him back from Abimelech. Right. So the next thing would be the encounter with Avraham and Sarah settling in Guerra, and their encounter with Abimelech, which is interesting, by the way, because we may recall that there's a little bit of a parallel here. There's a little bit of a parallel with Avraham and Sarah going to visit an area and having a problem with the ruler of that area, and Sarah being taken away, so to speak, and there's an encounter like that that's happened before, and that happened in Parashat Lech Lecha with Paro. So it's interesting because why are we seeming to go through another scenario similar to one that we've already encountered before? It's very strange. Wherever he seems to go, he seems to bring about this kind of problem. That people desire his wife, and he has this whole problem with his wife and the rulers of that area. He's had it with Paro, and now he's got it with Abimelech. So that's our second topic. Our third topic?
Isaac and Ishmael.
Isaac and Ishmael. Chapter 21, we've finally reached the birth of Yitzchak. Finally. Right, we've been speaking so much about why does it take so long to get to the birth of Isaac when it was promised all of that time ago, and we had a whole deviation, a whole tangent into all of these other episodes. Why has it taken so long for Yitzchak to be born? Right, we already cleared the way of explaining why Yishmael had to come first, but now we've got a whole episode of Sodom that had to come before the birth of Yitzchak. Why is that story got to be in there? Why does Abimelech have to be in? Why is that all a prerequisite to finally reaching this section where Yitzchak is finally born? And you're right, we have the birth of Yitzchak, and then we have the friction that's created with Yishmael, and Yishmael is sent away. And that brings us on to our next topic, which is the alliance with Abimelech in Be'er Sheva. Right? And there's a whole episode which goes over there, which begs the question, why are we interrupting the Abimelech story with the birth of Yitzchak? Why not just have that going right the way through? Right? And not only that, but our next section, what's our next section? The big famous episode of Parashat Vayeira?
The trial.
The Akedah.
The trial, the Akedah. Excellent. The binding of Isaac. In which case we've got to ask, well, why is the Akedah not latched on to part 3? Why is there this Avimelech, Yitzchak, Avimelech, Yitzchak? Why is the parasha broken down like that? Why can't his birth be connected to his own story? And then finally, right at the end of Parashat Vayeira, we also have the birth of Rivka, which foreshadows and sets the scene for the content of the next parasha, Parashat, what's the next one? Vayeira, where we need to find a wife for Yitzchak. So those are our 6 pieces of the structure. And as we said, it seems very strange that we have a whole long paragraph with loads of things going on. It seems very strange that we have these different broken up chapters interrupting the flow of the story for either Abimelech or for Yitzchak. And so there's a lot that gets packed into this parasha in a very strange order. And we need to understand it. We need to learn about it. Because the structure is really designed to bring out the depth of the parasha. And it's going to all tie into the title of Vayeira. Right? Vayeira, we said, right at the very beginning, means, and he appeared. Right? Vayeira. So we have to understand a lot. Got a lot to get through. That was pretty much the introduction, and we're already half an hour in. That's crazy. So here we go. Let's start to link all of this in with our broader narrative, with everything that we've been talking about previously. Okay, we said that Avraham is not just an important individual in the context of human history, but we also have been talking about the midot of Hashem, the depths of his essence, which he said is one of these seven midot. If we don't recall what I'm talking about, here's a picture for us, nice and Kabbalistic again for you. So these are the midot through which Hashem guides the world. These are all kind of traits that we have to, at one time or another, employ. But the essence of these traits are encapsulated in our big players such as Avraham. And we said the first midah that we started to explore was chesed. And we said that Avraham was the embodiment of that chesed. Is this sounding familiar? Are we remembering some of this stuff? It's really blurred. I really just don't know what I can do about this blurring. I really, really don't know. If I do this, maybe. Is that any sharper?
No. It got sharper about 2 minutes ago with the previous slide, and then it went blurred again. So it must be.
It's not just the slide; it's you as well.
Yeah, you as well. It must be something with the Wi-Fi or something, or I don't know.
What a shame, guys. I don't know.
It's actually difficult to read.
I can imagine, but I don't know how to share this information with you in any other way. I guess we could try it like this. What happens if I do this? Is that
That's
better.
okay? So it's difficult for me to see you guys, but let's hope that this works for you guys. I'm sorry that it's been such a balagan. Sometimes tech wants to be your friend, and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so you guys can all see, hopefully. Fine. So we said that Avraham embodies chesed, right? We said that. Okay, good. So we said that Avraham embodies chesed, and we talked about how Yishmael was the pasul of that chesed. He was the negative aspects of chesed, and we talked about how transitioning from the pasul of chesed, of getting rid of the bad elements of chesed through Yishmael, it paves the way for Yitzchak, and that's why we had the birth of Yitzchak coming so much later on, because we had to clear out the bad traces of chesed so that Avraham could just pass the purity, as it were, of this midah through to Yitzchak. And so as we move from Lech Lecha into our parasha Vayeira, we're transitioning from the individual of Avraham into the individual of Yitzchak, and we're also transitioning from the midah of chesed into the midah of Gevura, which is encapsulated by Yitzchak. And we're going to talk more about what all of this means and to try and understand what we're talking about when we talk about Gevura, how it relates to Yitzchak in the context of this story, start to understand how it lays the groundwork for understanding the whole parasha. Okay, so just to refresh our memory, we said these 7 midot are the ways through which Hashem interacts with the world and guides the world. They are how we feel his presence in the world. We said that Avraham is chesed. Everything that he did was about chesed. We talked about how chesed is the tendency to go beyond our boundaries. It can be positive and it can be negative. And we've given examples of positive chesed, hospitality and tzedakah and all of the things that we talked about. And we talked about negative associations and examples of chesed, trespassing and arayot and immoral relationships. So these were all under the banner of chesed, the ability, the tendency to go beyond our boundaries, positively and negatively. It's an expansive midah. We go beyond ourselves. And so Gevura, we started to talk about this last time, Gevura is the opposite of that. It's the tendency to remain inside our boundaries. Whenever I remain inside of myself, that is an act of Gevura. So Gebor is the tendency to remain inside our boundaries. We see a source for understanding Gevura in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. All of those who come to Lunch and Learn will be familiar with this straight off the bat. Ben Zoma says, who is a Gebor? Gebor in Hebrew we often translate as who is a strong person. Right? Who is a strong person? So immediately our minds will start to conjure up bodybuilders. That's a strong person. Big muscles. That's a strong person. But we have to appreciate that all animals can be physically strong. There are many animals which are stronger than humans. So we're not just looking for a definition of Gebor, of Gevura, with relation to physical strength. There must be a type of human strength that is different from just brute physical muscles. Right? Gevura has to relate to something in a uniquely human way. And says Ben Zoma, Hakovesh et Yitzro. It is somebody who is able to overcome his Yetzer. When he has a temptation urging him to do something, his Yetzer hara is encouraging us to do something. I am a Gebor if I can hold that back, if I can restrain myself, if I can stay within my boundaries and overcome that temptation. So Gevura, to be a Gebor, is all about subduing our evil inclination. It's all about self-discipline. It's all about self-restraint. It's all about saying no. These are all uniquely human traits. The ability to overcome what our animalistic drive, what our temptations, what our passions might be encouraging us to do. I am a Gebor. I am displaying an act of Gevura if I manage to overcome these urges and just say no. This is why, by the way, we might be familiar with this source as well. The Gemara says, Le'olam tehei smol docha v'yamin mekarevet. All Gemaras are famous, but this one is really quite well known. Right? The sages taught that it should always be the left weaker hand that pushes another away, that shows restraint, that creates boundaries, and it's the right hand, the yamin, which is mekarevet, which draws a person near, which expands you beyond your own boundary and brings others in. Right? Very, very interesting, this, guys. You know, we know that there are 7 colours of the rainbow. Right? In nature, there are 7 colours. And Chazal, our sages, our rabbis, they link these 7 colours to the 7 Sfirot. Which colour do you think is the colour for Gevura? To just say no.
Scarlet?
Scarlet? Did you say?
Yeah.
You're not far off, Kathy. Alright? It's red. Red is the colour of Gevura. Isn't that... Pardon me? Yeah. You were going to say that, Miriam?
Oh, I said it's the opposite end of the spectrum from the violet.
I thought Kathy said scarlet. I'm sorry. I didn't want to pick her up on the...
Red scarlet,
I heard it was violet.
I heard scarlet, which is why I was... I'll give her a half a point. right?
Thank you.
So it's amazing how somehow inherently we've had this sense of red meaning stop, red meaning restraint, red meaning pushing away. It's an amazing thing. That is the Kabbalistic understanding that Gevura is associated with the color red. Now, let me ask you a question. Yishmael was the Pasul of Chesed, right? He was the negative manifestations of Chesed. Who is going to be the negative manifestations of Gevura? There's going to be a character that comes along shortly who's going to be the negative manifestation of Esav. And how do we describe Esav, Richard?
Edom.
Edom, red, of a reddish hue. Amazing. Once it all starts to piece together, right? So Esav is red as well. It all starts to overlap. It's really quite amazing, right? So we're going to see Avraham is Chesed, and the bad parts of that go through Yishmael. Yitzchak is Gevura, and the bad traits of that go through Esav, which we haven't got to yet, and we won't get to for quite some time. And then Yaakov will come along next with Tiferet. We're weeks, if not months, away from getting to that point, but baby steps. So
Question.
Pardon me?
Going back.
Yeah.
How does this relate to people being left and right-handed? Sorry, I'm going back to the previous.
How does it relate? Oh, the piece of Gemara there, the Talmud wasn't talking about left-handed and right-handed, but symbolically, the right side is Chesed, and the right side, Kabbalistically, mystically, is all to do with going beyond ourselves and bringing people in. And the left side is the side of restraint, of pushing people away. So it's not a Gemara about being left-handed or right-handed. It's about the mystical symbolism of the left side and the right side, right? Going back to our, oh gosh, miles away now. Oh, come on, that's way too far. Okay, there. Going back to our thing, right? The right side, you got Chesed on the right and you've got Gevura on the left. So within this Kabbalistic mystical world, the right side is always the side of strength. The left side is the side of weakness. That's why, interestingly, in Jewish law, there's a lot of different practical details. Putting your right shoe on first before your left shoe, and putting your right sleeve or your right leg or whatever into your shirt, your trousers, whatever it is. Doing these things first. Prioritizing the right side over the left side. It's all connected to this concept. It's all connected to this idea. So we have Chesed, we have Gevura, we have the right, we have the left, we have the side that expands, the side that restrains. All right, and what's interesting is that we have two distinct terms. All right, we have these two primary midot, which are very opposites. Right, Chesed bringing in, Gevura pushing away. We have two midot. We have two ways of relating to Hashem. We have two ways of serving Hashem, which are connected to these two midot. Some of us might be familiar with this, some of us might not. But the two ways that we can serve Hashem, one is called Ahavat Hashem, service of God through love. And the other one, anyone want to take a stand? Excellent, Miriam. Yirat is interesting because sometimes we call this Yirat Shamayim, sometimes we call this Yirat Hashem, but generally the terms are Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Shamayim, right? Ahava, love, is very much Chesed oriented. Yirat Shamayim is very much Gevura oriented. It's interesting that one is phrased as the love of Hashem, and that's because, in a way, we are focusing on going beyond our boundaries to connect with something which is beyond me and to bring it closer. It's more intimate, and therefore we relate to it more directly. When we are close to someone, we call them by their name. When we love someone, when we have a productive relationship with someone, we refer to each other by our first names. Right? When we're distant, so then you'll be Mr. this or Mrs. that. So love of Hashem is more intimate, more close, more chesed oriented. Yirat Shamayim is a way of serving God that creates distance. Sham literally means there, it's far away. Yeah? So how would we translate Yirat Shamayim?
Fear of God.
Fear of God. That's often the terminology that we use. Fear is about creating distance. It's not just fear, it's also awe. Being in awe of Hashem. So it's
I've thought of it as respect.
Respect. Either way, you're creating a distance. You're creating a gap between you and Hashem. You are realizing how small you are in comparison to an infinite creator. You are cancelling yourself out in front of Hashem. Right? It's also the word yirat. Right? Is also connected to the word for seeing. I guess perhaps when you see things a bit clearly, so then you realize the magnitude of Hashem. Perhaps that's part of the layers of connection there of yirah, of fear, of awe, of amazement, of wonder, and of seeing as well. Right? By the way, the parasha is called Vayeira, which is also rooted in these same letters. The Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. We don't call them the days of fear. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we call those the days of awe. Right? So awe is a bit higher, a bit loftier than fear. Fear is very much, I'm afraid of what God might do to me, and so I'm going to do what he says because I don't want to get punished. That's one level of fear, of service out of fear. But service out of awe is where you start to realize how incredible Hashem is, and the more that I have a greater perception of who or what Hashem is and how infinitely powerful he is, so the more distant the gap is between my limitations and his infinite capabilities, I become in awe of him because I become more and more aware of how different we actually are. So Parashat Vayeira is all about revealing Guerra in the world. It's about revealing Yirah in the world. That's why, part of the reason why it's called Vayeira. The concept of sight and fear repeats itself throughout the whole of the parasha. Take a little look at this. All right, this is very unusual for the Torah. All right, so the parasha is called Vayeira, and we see words associated with this root appearing again and again and again. So just in the first couple of lines, Vayeira elav Hashem be'elonei ma'arei, right? Vayisa einav vayar v'hinei shlosha anashim nitzav vayar. Yeah. So it appears over and over again, but not only that, but we also see some associated terms, phrases connected to the concept of seeing. Vayisa einav, he lifts up his eyes. Matzasi chen beinecha, found favor in your eyes. Right? As we go through the parasha, we see over and over and over again words associated and connected to sight, and connected to fear, and connected to the concept of seeing things. It comes up again and again throughout the whole parasha, which is quite unusual. So that's an important thing to notice as well. If you see these things in the Hebrew, right? You've got Abimelech having a dream. That's the green at the top of the screen over there. Abimelech having a dream in the middle of the night. It's all connected ultimately to this concept of seeing, this concept of fear. It's a thread that goes throughout the whole parasha. Just in the Akedah itself, look how many yellow highlights we've got over there of the concept of fear and the concept of seeing that come up just in that section. When Avraham is with Abimelech in Guerra, And Abimelech is confused as to why Avraham has not been clearer as to their identity. And Avraham says, Ki amati rak ein yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. There is no fear of God in this place. So again and again, this replays, it repeats throughout the whole of the parasha. And it's good to be able to see that structurally throughout the entirety of the parasha. But which one, guys, do you think is better? To serve God out of awe, out of fear, to serve God out of love? See a few lips going love. Yeah? Hands up if you think love. Hands up if you think fear. The love has it. Love is in the air. So Ahavat Hashem is a higher level than Yirat Hashem or Yirat Shamayim. Right? But what often happens is that Yirat Hashem or Yirat Shamayim is the foundation of building a platform of service to the Almighty. It leads to Ahavat Hashem. And this is an important point because the first step should always be to remain inside boundaries. And then once the boundaries are established and we know what we're doing, right, then we start to step out of the borders and step out of the boundaries and enter into a closer, more intimate relationship. Once we are established with what the boundaries are, then we can start to know how to best work within and beyond those boundaries. If we start by crossing the line, if we start by crossing the boundaries and getting too intimate too quickly, too forceful too quickly, we can understand how this might play out in a human relationship. If you start by going over and being too overly familiar and being too overly intimate, right, that's not going to work. All right, you first have to establish the parameters and establish the boundaries, and then from there the relationship can grow and the love can grow. So Ahavat Hashem is the destination. It's the better way of serving God. Chesed is always better, as it were. We have a phrase, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that the world is created, the world is built through Chesed, right? Ahavat Hashem is going to be better, but we have to first establish some Yira. Now this is interesting because really Avraham paved the way, starting with Ahavat Hashem. So it's interesting because we're saying it's very important to have a foundation of Yira first, right? But then the actual flow of the narrative of the book of Bereshit doesn't play like that at all, because you have Chesed coming up first, right? You have Avraham coming up first, and this is interesting. This is a very important point, because part of the reason why we see repetitions of episodes happening between Avraham and Yitzchak is because you had to get Chesed, you had to get Avraham into the world first, but then the foundation has to be restarted. It has to be replayed by Yitzchak so that you have that baseline of Yira that's also in existence. And I'm not sure if that's coming across clearly, but you have to have the foundation of Yira. We couldn't do that with Avraham because he had to inject the whole system into our DNA, so to speak. Right? But once Avraham has started the process, we then almost start again through Yitzchak. And this is why we have so many episodes replaying and restarting through Yitzchak as we go through this parasha and the next parasha. It's why we have the wells which get covered up and are redug by Yitzchak. Don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's why Avraham may build up a following of people, but they seem to mysteriously disappear. You know, he's so busy doing kiruv, he's so busy doing outreach to people and teaching them about monotheism, but then we don't seem to have any trace or any remnant of that as the future develops. And that's because the foundation has to be built with Yira. So even though Avraham comes first and he goes through these motions, they have to be revisited by Yitzchak and Gebor, because that has to be the foundation. Right? Chesed is the higher midah, Gebor is lower than that, but almost paradoxically, we have to have the foundation of building something up through Yira and then leading back into to Ahava. I'm hoping there's a semblance of clarity in what I'm saying, right? There's a verse in Tehillim, Sur Meira Va'asei Tov. First of all, you have to move away turn away from doing evil, and then to do good, right? We have negative mitzvot, which we have to steer clear of. We have positive mitzvot, which we have to do, right? So we are holding back from doing bad things, and then we are actively pursuing doing good things, okay? And any time that a person subdues and nullifies and cancels those temptations, right? Not just because of an internal moral value, but because you have Yirat Shamayim, you have a cognizance of your place in the world, and so you are able to subdue and withhold yourself from doing the wrong thing. There is an exhibition. You are displaying the midah of Guerra. You are cancelling out your will, right? Your temptations, your urges. You're cancelling them out in favor of the greater will of Hashem, right? Which is exactly the opposite of expansion, of Ahavat Hashem, of Chesed. It's two very distinct opposites. Okay, so that's kind of an introductory piece then that brings us to a very important question. Oh, okay. And that important question is the concept, what do we call it when we cancel the entirety of our being for Hashem? Right? If what I'm saying is that by little acts of Gebor, I am cancelling out a piece of myself, a part of my temptation, because I appreciate that it's not the will of the Almighty, so then what is it called when I cancel out the entirety of my being? So this might not be familiar to us, but there's a phrase for this, there's a term for this, and it's called Mesirat Nefesh. Putting our life on the line, so to speak. Right? And one of the sources for Mesirat Nefesh, we say every single day, twice a day, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. It's the beginning of the Shema, to love Hashem with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our resources. Says the Gemara in Brachos, Rabbi Akiva Omer, when the Torah says b'chol nafshecha, what does it mean? Afilu notel et nafshecha. Even if you have to put your life on the line, you have to give up your life for the sake of Hashem, right? That's how one can love Hashem. That's how one can connect to Hashem. Even if everything is at stake, even if you have to completely negate every single part of your existence. Right, we might be familiar with the fact that people have had to martyr themselves throughout history, giving up their lives for the sake of Judaism, for the sake of the situations that they have been in. That is called Mesirat Nefesh, foregoing your entire existence for the sake of the Almighty. Please God, none of us should ever have to be in that situation, but that is, it would seem to be the most extreme manifestation of this Gevurah, the most extreme manifestation of nullifying yourself, of negating yourself for a divine plan, for a divine will. And in our history, who is the person who personifies complete Mesirat Nefesh, putting it all on the line?
Avraham.
Not Avraham.
Moshe. Isaac.
Thank you, Martin. Ding, ding, ding. Yitzchak at the Akedah is the one who gives his entire life. He's willing to put his life on the line. The binding of Isaac, the potential slaughtering of Isaac, right? That is Yitzchak, who embodies Gevurah, who embodies the willingness to completely put everything aside for the Almighty. He embodies this concept of Mesirat Nefesh. He puts his life on the line. Says the Midrash, Uvachol Nafshecha, commenting again on these words, Yitzchak, with all your soul, just like Yitzchak, who offered himself up onto the altar at the Akedah. You know, it's interesting because we always refer to the Akedah story as a story that's about Avraham. And the test, Abraham's 10th test, is to go through the Akedah. We forget about Yitzchak. He was literally on the Akedah. Now, it's interesting, by the way, because I said our man Yitzchak at the Akedah. Some of us have this perception that Avraham is taking a little kid up onto the altar, right? He wasn't a little kid. He was a man, and he was fully aware of what was going on, but he was completely willing to give up his entire life for Hashem. This act of extreme gevurah, this act of extreme mesirat nefesh, right? So that's our midrash over there, talking about Yitzchak being prepared to give up his life for the Almighty, and the midrash elsewhere says that we consider the ashes of Yitzchak as if they are heaped up on the altar, which is an astonishing statement for our rabbis to say, because he wasn't slaughtered, was he?
No.
He wasn't burnt up as an offering, right? There's something that's going on with this Akedah, and fundamentally, what we want to try and bring out, right? This is all bringing us to a point of realization that the Yitzchak that went onto the altar was not the same Yitzchak that came off the altar afterwards, right? Even if he wasn't slaughtered. Okay, there was an extreme act of devotion, an extreme act of mesirat nefesh, of putting everything on the line for Hashem, for a divine plan, willing to subjugate, willing to nullify, willing to, we say in Hebrew, to be mevatel, to completely ignore and subdue anything that you might be feeling, anything that you might be tempted by, anything that you might have an urge to do, and being able to subdue all of that because it's not what Hashem wants. And the amazing thing about this Akedah experience is that Yitzchak in that moment is achieving something and bringing this potent act of Gevurah into the world through that action, right? We are starting to come towards the end of our session, but I just want to help you out. Just want to share some amazing things about the Akedah, really. This isn't the only time that we're going to talk about the Akedah, but just some very, very interesting things, something to kind of whet our appetite a little bit with how crazy you can go, you know, how deep down the rabbit hole you can go with the story of the Akedah, right? The Yitzchak that gets onto the altar is not the same Yitzchak that comes off the altar. There's a few different ways, a few different things that we see in our sources about the Akedah, which are really quite fascinating. So, Rashi brings down that the angels cried when Yitzchak was on the altar, and the tears of the angels fell into Yitzchak's eyes, and that's why we see as he gets older that he loses his vision. Right? There was something so incredibly deep about this Akedah experience that it changed him literally. The fact that his eyes get impacted as a result of the experience. Another source says that Yitzchak saw the Shekhinah and it blinded him. Right? There's something so intense and so potent about this experience. It's where the full midah of Gevurah comes out and gets injected into our spiritual DNA. This is the moment at which that happens. That's what our Parsha of Vayeira is really building up towards. I'll tell you some other very interesting things as well. You can either take these things or leave these things, but they're fascinating nonetheless, and you can see just how deep it goes. There's a source that says that he had a female neshama at the time of the Akedah, a female soul at the time of the Akedah, and at the time of the Akedah, that soul left him, that neshama left him, and a masculine soul came into him, right? Which is why after that he now becomes capable at some point of having children. There are sources. This is amazing. I've never found the source, but I remember my rabbi teaching me this years ago. There's a source that says, I'm guessing it's in the Kabbalistic mystical sources, there are sources that say that Yitzchak was actually slaughtered at the Akedah. That he was actually slaughtered, right? And that there was actual Mesirat Nefesh. He literally put his life on the line, right? This is they base this on the fact that we see in verse 19, Vayeshev Avraham el Na'arav, that Avraham returns to Eliezer and Yishmael, who is left at the bottom of the mountain. So Vayeshev Avraham el Na'arav, and they go off and they go back to Beersheba. So, this deep source says, well, where's Yitzchak? Deep source answer, he never came off the Mizbeach, because he actually ended up losing his life at the Akedah, right? Which is wild. Okay, at the top of the page over here, verse 16, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son. Oh, says these deep sources, he literally gave up his son at the altar. As I said, take it or leave it. It's just interesting that these sources exist. If you jump back to verse 13 over here, right? Vayisa Avraham et einav, he lifts up his eyes and he sees, V'hine ayel acher, there's another ayel, there's another ram. Why do you need another ram? Right, which is caught up in the bushes. Vayelech Avraham vayikach es ha'ayel vaya'alehu le'olah tachat beno. Right, he takes this ayel, he takes this ram and he offers it up tachat beno. Right, so usually we translate this as instead of his son, but this deep source says no. He was literally underneath his son. They were on the altar together. It's amazing. They say this is why Rivka falls off the camel when she sees Yitzchak for the first time. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you need to read a bit ahead. Spoiler alert. But when Rivka meets Yitzchak for the first time, she falls off her camel, and that's because this source says that he literally reappeared from Shemayim. Right? He gets brought back to life. Right? And out of sheer shock, she falls off the camel. It's why they say that when Yitzchak is smelling the clothes of Yaakov at the time of the blessing, when Jacob steals the blessing, so he says that his clothes smell like the orchard. What's the orchard? The source says it's the Garden of Eden. Well, how would he know what the Garden of Eden smells like? Oh, he must have been in the Garden of Eden, and that's how he knew what it smells like. So there's a lot of very interesting things. I can see Lawrence just on the edge of his seat, ready to jump on me over here. But nonetheless, it's very, very interesting once you start to go down this rabbit hole of the Akedah. Right? And if that's the case, that he did get sacrificed, then we'd be seeing the first example of Tchiyat HaMeitim, of resurrection of the dead. Maseh Avot Siman Labanim, which we've talked about, the actions of our forefathers setting precedent for the future, right? That's the prototype, as it were, for resurrection of the dead. So as I said, it's not a mainstream opinion, but it's interesting just how far this thing can actually go. But whichever way we look at it, right, the Yitzchak that goes onto the altar is not the same Yitzchak that comes off. There is something so transformative, there is something so potent and so incredibly powerful with this action of Mesirat Nefesh, that we now have Gevura in the world. We now have this transition from Chesed to Gevura, from Ahava to Yira, the full self-cancellation of Yitzchak's being, which is incredible.
Is it one of the reasons why he never leaves Israel?
Yes, because he is infused with the sanctity of a sacrifice, and the sacrifice may never then come outside of the borders of Israel. Yeah. So something incredibly powerful, something incredibly transformative. It moves us in terms of the narrative from Avraham now into the stage of Yitzchak, from Chesed into Kavura, from Ahava to now building the same foundations from a standpoint of Yira, from a standpoint of awe, from a standpoint of fear, from the standpoint of the full realization of how incredible Hashem is. And this is where it happens. It happens in the Akedah, part 5 of the parasha, which means we have to ask ourselves, why do we need everything else? Right? Why do I need the mission? Why do I need Guerra and Abimelech? Why do I need the birth of Yitzchak to finally come after those 2 sections? Why couldn't I have had it earlier? Why do I have to interrupt the story with the... Why not have the Akedah that much earlier? Let's bring out this midah of Gevurah that much earlier. So we started at the end, really, but we now need to go back. We need to understand what is going on in the other parts of our parasha that allow us to transition from Avraham to Yitzchak, to transition from Chesed to Gevurah, and to transition from Ahava to Yirah. That all takes place in the other sections of our parasha, but all of that we're going to discuss next week. All right, so that's where we come to in terms of this week's material. We'll move on to next week and to start to understand what we are paving the way. What we are paving the way with the other parts of this narrative to bring us to that point of the Akedah, to bring us to that transition. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is all going to come next week. And that, my friends, is all we've got time for on the stream. We're going to stay on Zoom for more questions and for more answers. But to all those watching on Facebook and on YouTube, we will see you next week. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful and meaningful